The desert wind carried secrets that night in 1887, whispering through the canyons of Arizona territory like the voices of ancient spirits. But Rebecca Martinez never imagined that her world would shatter with 3 simple words from her father's lips: "You are dead." Standing on the porch of the only home she'd ever known, clutching her swollen belly with trembling hands, she watched the man who raised her turn his back forever. What she couldn't know was that miles away, across the vast expanse of red earth and sagebrush, an Apache warrior named Ayanna had seen her face in a vision that would change the course of both their destinies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Martinez had always been the pride of Cedar Ridge, a small settlement nestled between the towering red cliffs of what would one day become Arizona. Her father, Thomas Martinez, owned the largest cattle ranch for 50 miles, and Rebecca was his golden child, the daughter who could rope a calf as well as any cowboy, who could calculate the ranch's profits in her head, and who turned heads wherever she went with her striking dark hair and emerald eyes. At 19, Rebecca possessed a rare combination of beauty and intelligence that made her the most sought-after young woman in the territory. Suitors came from as far as Phoenix, bringing flowers and promises of comfortable lives. But Rebecca had dreams that stretched beyond the confines of marriage and motherhood. She wanted to attend the new university in Tucson to study literature and maybe even become a teacher. Her father, though traditional in many ways, had always encouraged her ambitions. "You've got more brains than half the men in this territory," Thomas would say, watching her read by lamplight long after the ranch hands had turned in for the night. "Don't let anyone tell you differently." But everything changed when Rebecca met James Whitmore. James arrived in Cedar Ridge in the spring of 1887, a smooth-talking businessman from California with plans to establish a mining operation in the nearby mountains. He was handsome in a polished way that was foreign to the rugged territory, clean-shaven, well-dressed, with an easy smile and pockets full of gold coins. He took rooms at the boarding house and immediately began courting Rebecca, with a sophistication that dazzled the young woman. Where the local boys brought her wildflowers, James brought her books of poetry. Where they offered horseback rides, he spoke of San Francisco's grand theaters and New York's towering buildings. He painted pictures of a world beyond the desert, a world where a woman like Rebecca could be more than just a rancher's daughter. "You're wasted in this place," James would whisper during their evening walks along the creek. "A woman of your caliber belongs in civilization, not out here with the coyotes and scorpions." Rebecca found herself caught up in James's vision of their future together. He spoke of taking her to California, of introducing her to society, of the life they would build among the cultured elite of San Francisco. For the first time in her life, Rebecca felt truly seen, truly valued for more than her ability to manage cattle and balance ledgers. Thomas Martinez watched his daughter's courtship with growing unease. There was something about James Whitmore that didn't sit right with him, something too smooth, too practiced in the way he spoke and moved. When Thomas made inquiries about the man's background, he found only vague stories and conflicting accounts. But Rebecca was besotted, and Thomas knew better than to forbid the relationship outright. Instead, he watched and waited, hoping his daughter would come to her senses. The romance progressed quickly, perhaps too quickly. James spoke of marriage within weeks of his arrival, promising Rebecca that they would wed as soon as his business affairs were settled. He painted elaborate pictures of their wedding in San Francisco, of the house they would build, of the children they would raise among the finest society California had to offer. Rebecca believed every word. Their secret meetings became more frequent, more intimate. James knew exactly what to say to make Rebecca feel sophisticated and worldly, to make her believe that their love was something special, something that transcended the mundane rules of small-town propriety. He convinced her that their physical relationship was a natural expression of their commitment to each other, that they were practically married already in the eyes of God. "We're bound together in ways that go deeper than any ceremony," he would tell her, his hands gentle on her face as they lay together in the old line shack by the creek. "You're mine, Rebecca, and I'm yours. The rest is just paperwork." For 3 months, Rebecca lived in a dream. She helped James with his supposed mining surveys, accompanying him on long rides into the mountains where he claimed to be evaluating potential dig sites. She listened to his stories of the grand life they would build together, of the children they would raise, of the legacy they would create. She gave him her heart, her body, and her trust completely. The first crack in her perfect world came when old Miguel Santos, one of her father's most trusted hands, approached her with a worried expression after seeing her return from one of her rides with James. "Senorita Rebecca," Miguel said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "That man you're seeing, he's not who he says he is." Rebecca laughed, but there was something in Miguel's eyes that made her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "I was in Santa Fe last month, visiting my sister. I saw him there at the cantina. He was with another woman, a woman with yellow hair, who called him husband." The world seemed to tilt slightly under Rebecca's feet. "You must be mistaken. James has never been to Santa Fe." Miguel's weathered face was grave. "I know what I saw, Nina. And I heard other things too. Stories about a man matching his description who's been moving through the territory, making promises to young women, taking what he wants, and disappearing." Rebecca wanted to dismiss Miguel's words, to convince herself that the old ranch hand was mistaken or jealous or trying to cause trouble. But deep down, a cold certainty was beginning to form. She thought of all the times James had been vague about his past, all the questions he'd deflected with kisses and pretty words. That evening, she confronted James directly. "Tell me about Santa Fe," she said without preamble when he came to meet her at their usual spot by the creek. The change in his demeanor was immediate and telling. The easy smile faltered, and for just a moment, she saw something calculating and cold in his eyes before he recovered. "What about Santa Fe?" he asked, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Were you there last month? With a blonde woman who called you husband?" James's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, a kind of resigned amusement. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the warmth and devotion that had been there moments before. "You've been talking to that old Mexican, haven't you?" He laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "I should have known he'd stick his nose where it doesn't belong." The casual racism in his words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Miguel had been like a grandfather to her, a man who'd worked for her family for 20 years, with unwavering loyalty and dignity. To hear James dismiss him so callously revealed a side of his character she'd never seen before. "Is it true?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the way he was looking at her, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a woman he loved. "Rebecca, darling, you have to understand. Is it true?" she repeated, her voice stronger now. James sighed and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It's complicated. Yes, there was a woman in Santa Fe, but what we have is different. Special. You're special." The words she'd once treasured now sounded hollow and manipulative. "Are you married to her?" Technically, yes, but, Rebecca felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Technically, it's a business arrangement, nothing more. Her father owns mining interests. The marriage was about securing investments, not love. What you and I have is real, Rebecca. What she and I have is just practical. The cold certainty that had been building in Rebecca's chest crystallized into something sharp and painful. "And what about the other women? The ones Miguel heard about?" James's mask slipped completely then, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "You're being dramatic. So what if I've had other relationships? I'm a man of the world, Rebecca. I've lived. That doesn't change what we have. What we have, Rebecca said slowly, is built on lies. James stepped closer, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he'd used so effectively before. Rebecca, you're upset, and I understand that. But think about what you're throwing away. I can still give you everything I promised, the life in San Francisco, the culture, the sophistication. None of that has changed. Everything has changed, Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. I thought I knew you. I thought you loved me. I do love you, James said, but even as he spoke the words, they rang false. You're just ... You're not thinking clearly, you're emotional. It was then that Rebecca realized the full scope of her situation. She was 3 weeks late with her monthly bleeding, something she'd been too caught up in her romantic haze to fully register. But now, standing in the growing darkness with the stranger who wore James's face, reality crashed over her like a cold wave. She was pregnant. The knowledge hit her with such force that she actually staggered backward, James misreading her reaction, reached for her. Rebecca, let me explain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't touch me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't ever touch me again. James's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Rebecca. A big one. I'm offering you a chance at a real life, a life of refinement and culture. Without me, what are you? A rancher's daughter in the middle of nowhere, destined to marry some cowboy and pop out babies until you're worn out and used up by 30. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking, but Rebecca stood her ground. I'd rather be a rancher's daughter with integrity than a rich man's mistress built on lies. James studied her face in the moonlight, and she saw the moment he decided she was no longer worth the effort. Your loss, he said with a shrug. There are plenty of other young women who'd jump at the chance I'm offering. I'm sure there are, Rebecca replied. And I'm sure you'll find them and lie to them just like you lied to me. James turned to walk away, then paused. You know, Rebecca, you might want to think carefully about how you handle this situation. Small towns can be very unforgiving places for young women who make ... mistakes. The threat in his words was clear, and Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air. She watched him disappear into the darkness, and only then did she allow herself to cry. The next morning, James Whitmore was gone. Boarding house proprietor said he'd left before dawn, settling his account and offering no explanation for his sudden departure. Within a week, Rebecca learned that his mining claims had been fraudulent, his business contacts non-existent, and his promises of investment in the local economy nothing more than elaborate lies designed to gain credibility and access to the community's young women. But by then, Rebecca had bigger problems to face. Her monthly bleeding never came. The morning sickness started in the second week after James's departure, and by the third week, there was no denying the truth. Rebecca Martinez, the pride of Cedar Ridge, was pregnant and unmarried. For a while, she considered her options. She could claim the child was the result of a secret marriage, that James had been called away on urgent business but would return. She could try to find James and force him to take responsibility, though she had no idea where he'd gone or if James Whitmore was even his real name. She could leave Cedar Ridge, start over somewhere else where no one knew her story. But Rebecca had been raised to face problems head-on, not to run from them. After weeks of agonizing deliberation, she decided to tell her father the truth. Thomas Martinez listened to his daughter's confession in silence, his face growing stonier with each word. When she finished, he sat for a long moment, staring out the window at the ranch that had been his life's work. "You're certain?" he asked finally. "Yes, Papa." "And the man, this James Whitmore, he's gone?" "Yes, He was never who he claimed to be. He was married to another woman, maybe more than one. He lied about everything. Thomas was quiet for another long moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but cold. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Rebecca's heart sank. "Papa, No, I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Thomas's voice rose. "You've brought shame on our family name. You've made us the subject of gossip and ridicule. You've proven that all my efforts to raise you properly, to give you opportunities, to treat you as an equal, it was all wasted." "That's not true," Rebecca protested. "I was deceived, Papa. I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to be married." "You thought," Thomas repeated bitterly. "You thought like a foolish child instead of thinking like the intelligent woman I believed you to be. You let some smooth-talking stranger fill your head with nonsense and convince you to throw away everything we've built here." Rebecca felt tears burning her eyes. "I'm still your daughter. I'm still the same person." "No," Thomas said, his voice final. "You're not. The daughter I raised would never have done this. The daughter I raised would never have brought this kind of shame to our family." "Papa, please, I want you gone," Thomas said, turning away. "From her. I want you out of my house and off my land. You're no daughter of mine." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. "You can't mean that. I'm carrying your grandchild." "I have no grandchild," Thomas replied without turning around. "I have no daughter. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things and leave. If you're still here when I wake up, I'll have the hands remove you myself." Rebecca stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Papa, I have nowhere to go. I have no money, no family except you." "You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for a stranger," Thomas said, his words deliberately cruel. "You made your choice, Rebecca. Now you live with the consequences." That night, Rebecca packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag. She took her mother's jewelry, the small amount of money she'd saved from helping with the ranch books, and the horse her father had given her for her 18th birthday. As the sun rose over the red cliffs of Cedar Ridge, she rode away from the only home she'd ever known, carrying her unborn child and nothing else. Behind her, Thomas Martinez stood on the porch, watching her go. His face was stone, but his hands trembled as he gripped the porch railing. When Rebecca disappeared over the ridge, he turned and walked back into the empty house. Closing the door on the daughter he'd loved more than life itself, Rebecca rode east into the rising sun, toward the vast expanse of Apache territory, with no destination in mind except away. She had no way of knowing that her exile would lead her to a destiny far greater than anything she'd ever imagined, or that the child she carried would become the bridge between two worlds. The desert stretched endlessly before her, red and harsh and unforgiving. But somewhere in that vastness, a warrior named Ayana was waking from another vision, this one clearer than all the others. He saw a woman with dark hair and green eyes, heavy with child, riding alone through the sacred lands of his people. In his vision, she was surrounded by white light, and he knew with absolute certainty that she was the one the spirits had chosen for him. The two souls, broken and seeking, were moving toward each other across the desert like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered by the wind. Their meeting would change everything, not just for them, but for all who would follow. 3 days into the Chiricahua Mountains, Rebecca's horse began to limp. The mare had stepped wrong on loose shale while navigating a particularly treacherous slope, and though the injury wasn't severe, it meant Rebecca would have to travel more slowly through increasingly dangerous territory. Water was running low, her small supply of jerky and hardtack was nearly gone, and she hadn't seen another human soul since leaving the last trading post near Fort Bowie. But Rebecca pressed on, driven by a combination of desperation and stubborn pride. She couldn't return to Cedar Ridge, not after her father's words, not with her condition becoming more apparent each day. The towns she'd passed through had offered no sanctuary. News of her situation had somehow preceded her, carried by the network of gossip that connected every settlement in the territory. Doors that might have opened to Thomas Martinez's daughter remained firmly closed to an unmarried pregnant woman with no family to vouch for her. The desert was harsh, but it was also honest. It didn't judge or whisper behind her back. It simply was, in all its brutal beauty, and Rebecca found an unexpected peace in its indifference. What she didn't know was that her solitary journey had not gone unnoticed 50 miles deeper into the mountains, in a hidden canyon that had sheltered his people for generations. Ayanna stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast expanse of desert below. At 26, he was considered one of the most skilled warriors of his band, respected for his hunting prowess and his ability to move through the landscape like a ghost. But it was his other gift, his visions, that set him apart from his brothers and made him both revered and feared. Since childhood, Ayanna had been visited by dreams that came to pass. He had seen droughts before they arrived, warned of cavalry movements before scouts reported them, and once famously dreamed of a flash flood that would have wiped out their summer camp if they hadn't moved to higher ground. The tribal elders called him Vision Walker, and even the most skeptical warriors had learned to listen when he spoke of his dreams. For 3 moons now, Ayanna had been dreaming of the same woman. She appeared to him night after night, a woman, with skin like polished copper and eyes the color of sage after rain. In his visions, she was always pregnant, always alone, always moving through the sacred lands of his people, as if drawn by some invisible force. The dreams were so vivid he could smell the desert sage in her hair, see the determination in her jaw, feel the weight of her sorrow like a physical thing. The tribal medicine man, an ancient Apache named Cochise's shadow, had told him that such persistent visions were messages from the spirit world. "The ancestors are showing you something important," the old man had said, his weathered face grave. "This woman, she will play a role in your destiny, and perhaps in the destiny of our people." Ayanna had accepted this interpretation, but he hadn't expected the vision to become reality so soon. From his perch on the cliff, he watched a lone rider making slow progress along the valley floor below. Even at a distance, he could see that. The horse was favoring one leg, and the rider's posture suggested exhaustion. But it was when the figure dismounted to rest in the shade of a giant saguaro that Ayanna's blood turned to ice. The rider was a woman, and she was unmistakably pregnant. Ayanna's heart began to race as he studied her more closely. Dark hair that caught the sunlight, a proud way of carrying herself despite her obvious fatigue, and something in her bearing that matched perfectly with the woman who had been haunting his dreams. This was her, the woman the spirits had been showing him, but seeing her in the flesh raised more questions than it answered. She was clearly not Apache, her clothing and horse marking her as belonging to the world of the white settlers. What was she doing alone in Apache territory? Why was she traveling through some of the most dangerous land in the territory without protection or companions? Ayanna made his decision quickly. He would follow her, learn her story, and discover why. The spirits had chosen to show her to him. But he would be careful. A pregnant woman alone in the desert was either very desperate or very dangerous, and he had no intention of revealing himself until he understood which. For the next 2 days, Ayanna shadowed Rebecca's movements, staying just out of sight as she struggled through the increasingly difficult terrain. He watched her ration her water carefully, saw her treat her horse's injury with gentle competence, and observed the way she constantly scanned the horizon for threats. This was not some pampered settlement woman who had wandered into danger by accident. This was someone who knew the land, who understood its dangers, and who was traveling through Apache territory by choice rather than ignorance. On the second night, as Rebecca made camp in a small canyon that offered some protection from the wind, Ayanna crept close enough to hear her talking to her horse. Her voice was soft, musical, but there was steel underneath the gentleness. "Just a little farther, Estrella. she murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "We'll find water tomorrow, I promise. And maybe we'll find somewhere we can stay for a while." She placed her hand on her rounded belly, and Ayanna saw her face in the firelight. The resemblance to the woman in his visions was unmistakable, but there was something else, a sadness that went bone deep, a loneliness that made his chest ache in sympathy. "I don't know what we're going to do," she continued, speaking to her unborn child as much as to the horse. "I don't know where we're going or how we're going to survive. But I promise you this, I will never give up. I will never stop fighting for you." The fierce protectiveness in her voice stirred something in Ayanna's chest. This was not a woman who had been broken by her circumstances. This was a woman who had been forged stronger by them. The next morning brought disaster. Rebecca's water ran out completely, and her horse's limp had worsened overnight. She was forced to lead the mare rather than ride, which slowed her progress to a crawl. By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly, and Ayanna could see that she was in serious trouble. From his concealed position, he watched her stumble and nearly fall, catching herself against a boulder. She stood there for a long moment, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other shading her eyes as she scanned the barren landscape around her. For the first time since he'd been following her, Ayanna saw real fear in her posture. She was lost, alone, pregnant, and dying of thirst in the middle of Apache territory. If he didn't act soon, the woman from his visions would become just another casualty of the harsh desert. But approaching her presented its own dangers. She was armed. He'd seen the rifle in her saddle scabbard and the pistol at her hip, and she would likely shoot first and ask questions later if confronted by an Apache warrior. The relationship between his people and the white settlers was complicated at best, violent at worst, and a pregnant woman alone would have every reason to fear him. Ayanna made his choice. He would reveal himself, but carefully, showing himself to be a protector rather than a threat. The spirits had shown him this woman for a reason, and he would not let her die while he watched from the shadows. He began by leaving signs of his presence. A small pile of stones arranged in a way that could be natural but suggested human intervention, a broken branch placed deliberately across the path she was following. He wanted her to know she was being watched, but not necessarily by whom. Rebecca noticed the signs immediately. She had grown up on the frontier and knew how to read the landscape for evidence of human passage. Someone was following her, someone who was skilled enough to remain hidden but was choosing to reveal their presence. The question was whether this mysterious presence was friend or foe. She checked her weapons and continued forward. But now she was hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound, every movement in her peripheral vision. Her stalker was out there, pacing her, watching her struggle. The knowledge should have terrified her, but instead, it made her angry. "I know you're there," she called out suddenly, her voice carrying across the desert silence. "If you're planning to rob me, you're going to be disappointed. I don't have anything worth taking. If you're planning something worse... She drew her pistol and held it ready. "I may be pregnant, but I'm not helpless." From his hiding place, behind a cluster of prickly pear cactus, Ayanna almost smiled. The woman from his visions had spirit. But her defiance, admirable as it was, wouldn't save her from dying of thirst. He made his decision. Standing slowly, hands clearly visible and empty, Ayanna stepped out from behind the cactus and into Rebecca's line of sight. The effect was immediate and electric. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as she found herself face to face with an Apache warrior. He was tall and lean, his skin bronzed by the desert sun, his long black hair bound back with a leather cord. He wore traditional Apache clothing, buckskin leggings and a breechcloth, with a band of turquoise beads around his neck that caught the light. But it was his eyes that held her attention, dark, intelligent, and completely without malice. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the desert floor. Rebecca's pistol was aimed at his chest, But her hand was steady, her stance suggesting she knew how to use the weapon. Ayanna kept his hands visible, making no move toward the knife at his belt or the bow across his shoulder. "You are lost," he said finally, his English accented but clear. Rebecca blinked in surprise. She had expected war cries or attacks, not quiet conversation. "Ah yes, my horse is injured and I'm out of water." "You are also pregnant," Ayanna observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "Yes," Rebecca's chin lifted defiantly. "What of it?" "It is dangerous for a woman in your condition to travel alone through these mountains. There are many ways to die here." "I'm aware of the dangers," Rebecca replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "I can take care of myself." Ayanna studied her face, seeing the exhaustion she was trying to hide, the fear she was refusing to acknowledge. "Perhaps. But your horse cannot take care of itself, and you cannot continue without water." It was a simple statement of fact, but it hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She was barely holding on, and they both knew it. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know why you are here," Ayanna replied. "Why does a woman alone travel through Apache lands? Why do you choose the desert over the safety of your people?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Safety? You think I left safety behind me?" She gestured vaguely in the direction she'd come from. "There was no safety for me there. No home, no family, no future. Just judgment and shame and doors closing in my face." Something in her voice made Ayanna's chest tighten. "You have been cast out." "Cast out, thrown away, disowned, call it whatever you like. The result is the same." Rebecca's grip on her pistol loosened slightly. "I am nobody's daughter, nobody's responsibility, nobody's problem. I am just a woman with a bastard child. And nowhere to go." The pain in her words was so raw, so honest, that Ayanna felt it like a physical blow. This was why the spirits had shown her to him, not because she was a threat to his people, but because she was a soul in need of sanctuary. "You are wrong," he said quietly. Rebecca's eyes snapped to his. "About what?" "You are not nobody. You are the woman I have been dreaming of for 3 moons. You are the reason the spirits have kept me awake at night, showing me visions of your face." Ayanna took a careful step closer. "You are someone very important, though you do not know it yet." The words hung in the desert air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Rebecca stared at him, her pistol forgotten in her hand, trying to process what he'd just said. "You've been dreaming of me every night for 3 moons. The spirits showed me a woman with dark hair and green eyes, heavy with a child, traveling alone through the sacred lands of my people. They showed me that she was important, that she would play a role in something greater than herself." Ayanna's voice was calm, certain. "I have been waiting for you to arrive." Rebecca felt the world tilt around her. "That's impossible. You don't even know me. I know that you are brave enough to choose the unknown over the familiar when the familiar offers only pain. I know that you love your unborn child enough to risk everything for its future. I know that you have been hurt by someone you trusted, and that you carry that pain like a stone in your chest." Ayanna's dark eyes never left her face. "I know that you are stronger than you believe, and that you have not come this far to give up now." Each word hit Rebecca like a revelation. This stranger, this Apache warrior, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had, including herself. "How could you possibly know all that?" "Because the spirits show me what I need to see. And they have been preparing me for your arrival." Ayanna gestured toward the barren landscape around them. "This is not a place for a woman in your condition to die. You were meant for something more." Rebecca's resolve finally cracked. The pistol slipped from her numb fingers, and she sank to her knees on the hard desert floor. "I don't understand any of this. I don't understand why this is happening to me, or what I'm supposed to do, or how I'm supposed to survive. Ayana moved forward slowly, dropping to one knee beside her. You are not supposed to survive alone. That is why I am here. But you're Apache, Rebecca said, as if that explained everything. Your people and my people were enemies. Some of my people and some of your people are enemies, Ayana corrected. But you are no longer one of your people, and I am. Different from most of mine. Perhaps that is why the spirits brought us together. Rebecca looked up at him, this warrior who had appeared out of nowhere like something from a fever dream. What are you saying? I am saying that you do not have to face this alone anymore. I am saying that the spirits have shown me your importance, and I will not let you die in the desert. I am saying. Ayana paused, choosing his words carefully. I am saying that you are under my protection now, for as long as you need it. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Rebecca could barely process it. Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything. The spirits owe you something. And I serve the spirits. Ayana stood and extended his hand to help her up. Come, there's a spring not far from here, and my people have a camp in the next valley. You will be safe there while you decide what comes next. Rebecca stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. She would be placing her trust in a man she'd just met, a member of a people she'd been taught to fear, in a land she didn't understand. But the alternative was death, hers and her child's. She reached out and grasped his hand, feeling the calloused strength of his fingers close around hers. As he helped her to her feet, she felt something shift inside her chest, as if a weight she'd been carrying had suddenly been shared. I don't even know your name, she said softly. Ayana, he replied. It means eternal blossom in my language. I'm Rebecca. Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca, he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his voice, not like the condemned woman her father had spoken to, but like someone worthy of respect. Come, Rebecca Martinez. Let me show you that your journey is not ending, it is just beginning. The spring Ayana led Rebecca to was unlike anything she had ever seen. Hidden deep within a narrow canyon where red sandstone walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, the water bubbled up from underground sources, creating a small oasis of green in the harsh desert landscape. Ancient cottonwood trees provided shade, their leaves whispering secrets in the gentle breeze, while wild grasses and desert flowers created a carpet of unexpected color. But it was more than just a water source. Rebecca could feel it the moment they entered the canyon. There was something sacred about this place, something that made her speak in whispers and move with reverence. The very air seemed charged with spiritual energy, as if the earth itself was alive and watching. This is Crying Woman Spring, Ayana explained as he helped Rebecca dismount from her limping horse. My people have come here for generations when they need healing of body, mind, or spirit. The water here is blessed by the ancestors. Rebecca knelt by the pool's edge, cupping the crystal-clear water in her hands and drinking deeply. It was the sweetest water she had ever tasted, cool and pure, and she felt strength flowing back into her body with each swallow. As she drank, she noticed carved symbols in the rock walls around the spring, ancient petroglyphs that seemed to dance in the shifting light. What do they mean? She asked, gesturing toward the rock art. Ayana followed her gaze, his expression growing thoughtful. They tell the story of the first woman who came to this spring-seeking sanctuary. She was with child, cast out by her own people for loving someone they deemed unworthy. The spirits took pity on her and showed her this place, where she could find peace and safety until her child was born. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. That's remarkably similar to my situation. Perhaps not so remarkable, Ayana replied quietly. The spirits work in patterns, weaving stories that echo across generations. What happened to her might be a sign of what is meant to happen to you. What became of her? The first woman? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, studying the petroglyphs as if reading a book. She became something new, neither fully of her old world nor fully of ours, but a bridge between them. Her child grew to be a great leader, one who could speak to both peoples and help them understand each other. But that is a story for another time. As Rebecca rested by the sacred spring, Ayanna tended to her horse's injured leg with practiced skill. He gathered specific plants from around the oasis desert willow bark for its anti-inflammatory properties, and jojoba oil from nuts he carried in a small pouch. His hands moved with gentle confidence as he cleaned the wound and applied the natural remedies. "You know healing," Rebecca observed, watching him work. "Among my people, a warrior must know many things. How to hunt, how to fight, how to track, how to heal. A man who can only destroy is of little use to his tribe." Ayanna finished wrapping the horse's leg with strips of soft buckskin. "Estrella will recover, but she needs rest. We will stay here tonight before continuing to my people's camp." The name gave Rebecca pause. "How did you know my horse's name?" Ayanna smiled, the first truly warm expression she had seen from him. "You spoke to her yesterday evening. You thought you were alone, but sound carries far in the desert when you know how to listen." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You were watching me." "Protecting you," Ayanna corrected. "There are dangers in these mountains beyond thirst and heat. Mountain lions, bears, and sometimes men with darker intentions than mine. I have been shadowing your path for 2 days, ensuring your safety." The revelation should have made Rebecca angry. She valued her privacy and independence. But instead, she felt a strange sense of gratitude. For the first time in months, someone had been looking out for her, even when she didn't know it. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna built a small fire and shared his food with Rebecca. The meal was simple dried meat, flatbread made from mesquite flour, and tea brewed from desert sage butt. It was the first proper meal Rebecca had eaten in days. "Tell me about your people," Rebecca said as they sat by the fire. "What will they think of you bringing a white woman into their camp?" Ayanna stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up toward the darkening sky. "My band is small, perhaps 40 people, led by my uncle, Chief Natin. We are not the Chiricahua who fight the cavalry, nor the Mescalero who raid the settlements. We are the forgotten ones, the Apache who chose to remain hidden rather than fight or surrender." Forgotten ones? When the great chiefs like Cochise and Geronimo made war against the white soldiers, some of us chose a different path. We retreated deep into the sacred places, the hidden canyons and secret valleys that your people have never found. We live as our ancestors did, following the old ways, bothering no one and asking only to be left in peace. Rebecca heard something in his voice, not shame, but a kind of weariness. "Do you ever regret that choice? Not fighting with the others?" Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. "I have seen what war brings. I have seen settlements burned and families destroyed on both sides. I have seen good men become monsters and mothers bury children who should have outlived them. Sometimes the greatest courage is in choosing not to fight. But your people, do they see it that way? Some do. Others believe we are cowards, that we have abandoned our duty to defend Apache land and Apache honor." Ayanna's dark eyes met hers across the fire. "It is why I am different from most of my people, why the spirits perhaps chose me to find you. I do not see the world in terms of us and them, Apache and white. I see only people trying to survive, trying to find their place in a world that is changing faster than any of us can understand." Rebecca studied his face in the firelight, seeing wisdom beyond his years in his expression. "How old are you, Ayanna?" 26 summers. Old enough to have earned my place as a warrior, young enough to believe that the future can be different from the past." "And the visions, how long have you had them?" "Since I was a child. My grandmother said I was touched by the spirit world, that I could see things others could not. Sometimes it is a gift. Sometimes it is a burden." He paused, his gaze turning inward. The dreams of you were the strongest I have ever experienced. Night after night for 3 moons, I saw your face, felt your pain, knew that you were coming. My people began to worry that I was being driven mad by spirits. What did the dreams show you? About me, I mean. Ayana hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. I saw you traveling through our lands, alone and afraid but refusing to surrender. I saw you giving birth beside a sacred fire, surrounded by Apache women who treated you as a sister. I saw a child with your eyes and hair the color of obsidian, growing to be a bridge between our peoples. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. You saw my child being born? I saw many possible futures. The spirits show us what might be, not what must be. But in every vision where you survived, where you found peace, it was among my people. The implications of his words settled over Rebecca like a heavy blanket. You're saying my future lies with your tribe? I am saying that is one path open to you. There are others. You could continue traveling until you find a town that will accept you. You could try to make your way to California or Colorado, where your past might not follow you. But the spirits showed me the path that leads to happiness, not just survival. Rebecca stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and shift. The idea of joining an Apache band was so far outside anything she had ever imagined that she could barely process it. Yet what alternative did she really have? She was pregnant, alone, with no money and no family. Even if she found a town that would take her in, what kind of life would that be for her child? Always marked as a bastard, always reminded of the circumstances of its birth. What would happen to me there? In your camp? That would depend on many things: how you conducted yourself, how you adapted to our ways, whether you proved yourself useful to the tribe. But if you were accepted— Ayana paused, choosing his words carefully. Apache women have status. They own property, make decisions about their children's futures, divorce husbands who displease them. It is not like the world you come from, where a woman belongs first to her father and then to her husband. Rebecca had never considered that there might be places where women held more power than in her own culture. And my child would be Apache, raised in the traditional ways but also knowing of the white world through you. Such a child might be invaluable in the times that are coming. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Rebecca spoke again. Why are you helping me, really? Beyond the visions, I mean. You could have interpreted them differently. Could have decided I was a threat to be eliminated rather than someone to be protected. Ayana smiled slightly. You want the truth? Please. When I first saw you in the desert, struggling with your injured horse but refusing to give up, I saw something I recognized. I saw someone who had been broken by the world but was determined not to stay broken. I saw someone who was pregnant and alone but still fighting for her child's future. He paused, stirring the fire again. I saw someone like my mother. Rebecca heard the pain in his voice. What happened to her? She was taken by cavalry soldiers when I was 12. They were looking for Geronimo's band and found our camp instead. They decided we must be hostile because we were Apache, and they treated us accordingly. Ayana's voice was carefully controlled, but Rebecca could hear the old anger underneath. She was carrying my baby sister when they took her. I never saw either of them again. I'm so sorry. It was long ago. But when I see a pregnant woman in danger, when I see someone who needs protection— Ayana shrugged. Perhaps I am trying to save my mother, even though it is too late for her. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. This warrior who had appeared like an answer to her prayers was carrying his own wounds, his own losses. What if your people don't accept me? What if they see me as you saw the cavalry, as the enemy? Then we will deal with that when it happens. But I do not think it will come to that. My uncle Nanton is wise, and our medicine man Cochise's shadow has great vision. If they see what I have seen in my dreams, they will understand that you are meant to be with us, And if they don't? Ayanna met her eyes across the fire, his expression serious but not unkind. Then you will leave, and I will help you find another path. But give them a chance, Rebecca. Give us a chance. You have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. As the fire burned down to glowing embers, Rebecca made her decision. She had been cast out by her own people, left to die in the desert with nowhere to turn. This Apache warrior offered her not just survival, but the possibility of belonging somewhere again. It was terrifying and impossible, and completely against everything she had been taught about Indians and their ways. But what choice did she really have? "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come with you to your people's camp. I'll give them a chance." Ayanna nodded, as if he had never doubted her decision. "Rest now. Tomorrow we begin the journey to your new life." That night, Rebecca dreamed of red cliffs and sacred fires, of dark-eyed women who spoke in musical voices and children who looked like her, but moved with the grace of their Apache fathers. She dreamed of a life so different from anything she had known that it seemed like fantasy, but when she woke in the gray light of dawn, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Ayanna was already awake, tending to the horses and preparing for their journey. He had exchanged his buckskin clothing for a more elaborate outfit, a decorated shirt with intricate beadwork, leggings with silver concos down the sides, and a magnificent headdress with eagle feathers. He looked every inch the Apache warrior, proud and fierce and utterly foreign. "Why are you dressed so formally?" Rebecca asked as she gathered her few belongings. "We will reach my people's camp by midday. When I arrive with you, it must be clear that you are under my protection, that you are not a captive or a refugee, but someone I have chosen to bring to them." Ayanna helped her mount Estrella, who was moving much better after a night's rest. In Apache culture, appearance matters. How you present yourself and how you are presented determines how you will be received. As they rode out of the sacred canyon, Rebecca felt as if she were leaving one world behind and entering another entirely. The landscape began to change as they climbed higher into the mountains, the desert giving way to pine forests, the brutal heat softening into pleasant warmth. She could hear water running somewhere ahead, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and cooking food. They were approaching the hidden valley where Ayanna's people had made their home, and with each step, Rebecca felt her old life slipping further away. She was no longer Rebecca Martinez, the disgraced daughter of a wealthy rancher. She was becoming something new, something she couldn't yet define. The sound of voices drifted through the trees ahead, Apache voices speaking in their musical language. Ayanna called out in response, and Rebecca heard answering calls, excitement and curiosity in the voices. "They know we're coming," Ayanna said. "Word will have reached my uncle by now. He will be waiting to meet you." Rebecca's heart began to race. In a few minutes, she would come face to face with the man who would decide her fate and the fate of her unborn child. Everything depended on the next few hours, on whether Chief Nathan would see her as Ayanna did, or as an enemy to be driven away. As they emerged from the forest into a hidden valley green with grass and sparkling with streams, Rebecca saw her first Apache village. It was nothing like the savage encampment she had imagined. The tipis were arranged in orderly rows, children played safely in open spaces, and women worked at various tasks with quiet efficiency. Smoke rose from cooking fires, horses grazed peacefully in a natural meadow, and the whole scene had an air of prosperity and contentment. But what struck her most was the silence that fell as they appeared. Every person in the village, men, women, and children, stopped what they were doing to stare at the strange procession. An Apache warrior returning home with a pregnant white woman was clearly not an everyday occurrence. Ayanna rode straight toward the largest tipi in the center of the village, his bearing proud and confident. Rebecca tried to match his composure, but she could feel dozens of eyes upon her, measuring her, judging her. Deciding whether she belonged among them, that an elderly Apache man emerged from the central tipi, his presence commanding immediate respect from everyone around him. This had to be Chief Natan Ayana's uncle and the leader of this hidden band. He was shorter than Ayana but powerfully built, his weathered face marked by intelligence and authority. Eagle feathers adorned his long gray hair, and his clothing was rich with symbols of rank and achievement. Behind him came another figure that made Rebecca's breath catch, an ancient Apache medicine man whose eyes seemed to hold all the wisdom of the ages. This could only be Cochise's shadow, the spiritual leader Ayana had mentioned. The two men watched in silence as Ayana dismounted and helped Rebecca down from her horse. The entire village had gathered now, forming a circle around them, waiting to see what would happen next. Ayana stepped forward and spoke in Apache, his voice carrying clearly across the silent valley. Rebecca couldn't understand the words, but she could hear respect and formality in his tone. He was explaining her presence, asking for sanctuary, making his case for why she should be accepted. When he finished, Chief Natan studied Rebecca for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he stepped forward and spoke in heavily accented but clear English. "You are the woman from my nephew's visions." It wasn't a question. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. "You carry a child, yes. You have been cast out by your own people, yes." Chief Natan walked slowly around her, studying her from every angle. Rebecca stood perfectly still, allowing the inspection, knowing that everything depended on what this man decided about her. Finally, he stopped in front of her again. "Why should we welcome you among us? What do you offer that would benefit our people?" It was the question Rebecca had been dreading, but also the one she had been preparing for. She straightened her shoulders and looked Chief Natan directly in the eyes. "I offer loyalty to those who show me kindness. I offer skills. I can read and write. I understand numbers and can help with trade. I can work as hard as any woman here. Most importantly, I offer a child who will grow up knowing both worlds, who might one day help bridge the gap between your people and mine." Chief Natan considered her words, then turned to Cochise's shadow. The medicine man stepped forward and placed his gnarled hands on Rebecca's shoulders, closing his eyes as if reading something invisible. The touch lasted only moments, but Rebecca felt as if the old man was looking directly into her soul. When Cochise's shadow opened his eyes, he nodded once to Chief Natan and spoke a single word in Apache. Whatever he had said, it was the right answer. Chief Natan's stern expression softened into something that might have been a smile. "The spirits have spoken," he announced to the gathered tribe. "This woman and her child are welcome among us. She will be a daughter to our people, and her child will be raised as an Apache." The tension that had gripped the village suddenly released, and Rebecca felt tears of relief streaming down her face. She had found sanctuary at last, not just survival, but acceptance. For the first time since James Whitmore had revealed his true nature, Rebecca felt like she might have a future. As the villagers began to disperse, chattering excitedly among themselves, Ayana placed a gentle hand on Rebecca's arm. "Welcome home," he said quietly, and despite everything, the strangeness of her surroundings, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, the complete upending of everything she had thought she knew about her life, Rebecca realized that it felt exactly like coming home. Life among the Apache was unlike anything Rebecca had ever imagined. The first weeks in the hidden valley challenged every assumption she had held about Indian life, forcing her to relearn the most basic aspects of daily existence. But it was also liberating in ways she hadn't expected, freeing her from the rigid social structures that had governed her previous world. The woman assigned to guide Rebecca's transition was named Itzayana, which meant rainbow in the Apache language. She was Chief Natan's wife, a woman of perhaps 45 years whose calm authority and gentle wisdom had earned her deep respect throughout the village. Unlike many Apache women, Itzayana spoke excellent English, having spent time among traders and missionaries in her youth before choosing to return to traditional ways. First lesson, Itzayana told Rebecca on her second morning in the village. Forget everything you think you know about how women should behave. Apache women are not possessions or ornaments. We own our own property, choose our own husbands, and speak our minds in council. Your white world may have taught you to be silent and obedient, but here, such behavior would be seen as weakness. Rebecca soon discovered the truth of these words. Apache women moved through the village with confidence and purpose, their voices carrying equal weight in discussions about everything from hunting strategies to children's education. Mothers made unilateral decisions about their children's futures. Wives divorced husbands who proved lazy or cruel, and elder women commanded respect that transcended gender boundaries. But this freedom came with responsibilities that tested Rebecca's endurance daily. Apache life required skills she had never needed on her father's ranch, tanning hides, weaving baskets, gathering specific desert plants for food and medicine, and moving efficiently through terrain that could kill the unwary. Every task required precise knowledge passed down through generations, and mistakes could have serious consequences for the entire community. The other women watched Rebecca's struggles with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some, like Itzayana, seemed genuinely interested in helping her adapt. Others made no effort to hide their doubts about whether a white woman could ever truly become Apache. A few, led by a sharp-tongued woman named Nalnish, actively resented her presence. Why should we trust her? Nalnish demanded during Rebecca's first week, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. Her people have brought nothing but death and sorrow to ours. How do we know she isn't a spy, sent to learn our secrets and report back to the cavalry? The accusation stung because Rebecca understood the logic behind it. The relationship between Apache bands and white settlers was defined by generations of violence and broken promises. From the Apache perspective, welcoming any white person represented an enormous risk, but Itzayana defended Rebecca's presence with quiet authority. Coshice's shadow has looked into her spirit and found no deception. Ayana's vision showed her coming to us for 3 moons before she arrived. And most importantly, she is with child. No woman would risk her unborn baby in a spy mission. The argument seemed to settle the matter for most of the village, but Rebecca knew she would have to prove herself through actions rather than words. Every day brought new tests of her commitment and ability to adapt to Apache ways. The language proved one of her greatest challenges. Apache bore no resemblance to English or Spanish, requiring her to think in entirely different patterns. The sounds were subtle and musical, with slight changes in tone completely altering meaning. Rebecca spent hours each day working with Itzayana and the village children, who found her pronunciation attempts hilarious, but were patient teachers nonetheless. More difficult than language was learning to read the unspoken rules that governed Apache social interactions. Who could speak to whom, under what circumstances, and in what manner was far more complex than anything she had encountered in white society. Age, gender, clan relationships, spiritual status, and personal achievements all influenced social dynamics in ways that took weeks to understand. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of her new life was her evolving relationship with Ayana. The warrior who had rescued her in the desert remained a constant presence in her daily life, but their interactions had become formal and constrained since arriving at the village. He no longer spoke to her with the easy intimacy they had shared by the sacred spring. Instead, he maintained the proper distance expected between unmarried adults, speaking to her only when necessary and always in the presence of others. Rebecca understood the reasons for this change. Improper behavior between them could damage both their reputations and her chances of being fully accepted by the tribe. But she found herself missing their conversations, the moments when she had felt truly understood by another person. the situation became more complicated when other members of the tribe began suggesting that marriage between them would be the natural solution to several problems. Rebecca needed a husband to secure her position in Apache society. Ayanna needed a wife to establish his own household, and their union would formalize the spiritual bond that had brought them together. "It makes perfect sense," Ayanna told Rebecca one evening as they worked together preparing deer hide. "Ayanna is respected throughout the village. His visions mark him as spiritually gifted, and he has already demonstrated his commitment to protecting you. A marriage between you would be blessed by both the spirits and the tribe." Rebecca's hands stilled on the soft leather. "But we barely know each other. Everything between us has been about visions and spiritual destiny. What about choice?" "What? About love?" Ayanna smiled, her weathered hands never pausing in their work. "Apache marriages are built on respect, compatibility, and mutual benefit. Love often grows from shared struggles and common purpose. Would you rather marry a man who speaks of love but abandons you when difficulties arise, or one who may not speak of love but has already proven he will risk everything to protect you?" The comparison to James Whitmore was painfully clear, but Rebecca still struggled with the idea of entering another relationship so soon after her devastating betrayal. "I'm not sure I'm ready to trust any man again." "Perhaps that is wise," Ayanna agreed. "But consider this, among our people, women retain their independence even in marriage. You would keep your own property, make your own decisions about your children, and could end the marriage if Ayanna proved unworthy. You would have protections that white women never enjoy." These conversations about marriage became more frequent as Rebecca's pregnancy advanced, and her condition became impossible to hide. Apache society was practical about such matters. An unmarried pregnant woman was vulnerable in ways that threatened the entire community's stability. Marriage would solve those problems while legitimizing her child's place in the tribe. But the decision wasn't Rebecca's alone to make. Apache marriage customs required complex negotiations between families with considerations of status, wealth, and spiritual compatibility. As someone without Apache family, Rebecca's situation was unprecedented, requiring Chief Nanton and the tribal council to establish new protocols. The matter came to a head during Rebecca's 6th week in the village, when Coshice's shadow announced that he had received a vision about her future. The ancient medicine man called for a formal gathering, where he would share what the spirits had revealed. The entire tribe assembled that evening around a great fire built in the village's central space. Rebecca sat with the other women, her heart racing as she watched Coshice's shadow prepare for his revelation. The old man moved with ritual precision, burning specific herbs and chanting in the ancient Apache language before finally speaking. "The spirits have shown me a great ceremony," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering. "A sacred marriage that will unite two souls chosen by the ancestors themselves. The woman who came to us in dreams will become truly Apache through union with the warrior who was sent to find her." He turned his ancient eyes on Rebecca and Ayanna, who sat with the men on the opposite side of the fire. "This is not a marriage of convenience or necessity, but a sacred bond ordained by powers greater than ourselves. The children of this union will bridge two worlds and lead our people through the changes that are coming." The pronouncement sent a ripple of excitement through the gathered tribe. A marriage blessed by such powerful visions was considered extremely auspicious, promising prosperity and spiritual protection for the entire community. But Rebecca felt panic rising in her chest. The decision was being made for her, her future determined by visions and tribal politics rather than her own choices. She looked across the fire at Ayanna, trying to read his expression in the dancing flames. His face was carefully neutral, giving no indication of his own feelings about this spiritual mandate. Chief Nanton rose to speak, his voice formal and ceremonial. "If this marriage is truly blessed by the spirits, then it should be celebrated with full honors. But first, both parties must consent freely. Among our people, no one man or woman can be forced into marriage against their will. He looked directly at Rebecca. Woman who walks between worlds, do you accept this sacred union? The name was new apparently. The tribal council had chosen it to reflect her unique position, bridging Apache and white cultures. Rebecca felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, waiting for her answer. Everything she had gained, acceptance, security, a future for her child, hung in the balance. But even as she recognized the practical benefits of accepting, Rebecca couldn't bring herself to agree to marriage without understanding Ayana's true feelings. The visions that had brought them together were powerful, but they had never spoken of love, attraction, or even basic compatibility as potential spouses. I request permission to speak privately with Ayana before giving my answer, Rebecca said. Her voice steady despite her racing heart. A murmur ran through the crowd. Such a request was unusual, but not unheard of. Chief Nanton considered for a moment, then nodded. It is reasonable that you should know each other's hearts before making such a commitment. You may speak, but with Ayana present as witness. The three of them withdrew to Ayana's tipi, where Rebecca finally found herself alone with Ayana for the first time since their arrival at the village. The warrior sat cross-legged on a woven mat, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. What is your true feeling about this marriage? Rebecca asked without preamble. Beyond the visions and spiritual obligations, what do you, Ayana the man rather than Ayana the visionary, think about spending your life with me? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and honest. I have watched you these past weeks, learning our ways, struggling with our language, earning the respect of our women through your determination and strength. You are not the frightened woman I found dying in the desert. You have become someone formidable. That's not an answer to my question. You want me to speak of love, Ayana said. But I am not certain either of us knows what love means anymore. You were deceived by a man who spoke constantly of love. I have seen too many marriages built on passion alone crumble when real difficulties arose. Rebecca felt a flash of frustration. So you're saying you don't love me? I'm saying I respect you. I admire your courage and your refusal to surrender when everything seemed hopeless. I believe we could build a good life together, raise strong children, and find contentment in shared purpose. Ayana leaned forward slightly. Is that not more valuable than the pretty words that led to your current situation? His practical approach to marriage was thoroughly Apache, but it left Rebecca feeling oddly disappointed. She had been so thoroughly burned by romantic deception that she should have appreciated his honesty. Yet part of her still longed for something more than pragmatic compatibility. And if we marry, she asked, what would you expect from me? How would our household function? We would be partners in all things, Ayana replied. You would have your own property and make your own decisions, as all Apache wives do. Any children would be raised in both traditions, learning Apache ways, but also understanding the white world through you. I would protect and provide for our family, but I would not own or control you. And physically? Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to ask the question. What would you expect in terms of marital relations? Ayana's expression softened slightly. I would expect nothing that was not freely given. Apache marriages include physical intimacy, but it should be based on mutual desire, not obligation. Given your recent experiences and current condition, I would be patient. His consideration touched something deep in Rebecca's chest. Here was a man offering her protection, respect, and autonomy. Everything James Whitmore had promised, but never intended to deliver. Perhaps love could grow from such fertile ground. There is something else you should know, Ayana continued. My visions of you did not end with your arrival here. I have seen us growing old together, watching our children become leaders among both our peoples. I have seen you as a bridge builder, helping Apache and white communities understand each other. The spirits showed me that our union would benefit more than just ourselves. Rebecca absorbed this revelation, feeling the weight of spiritual destiny settling around her like a cloak. You really believe the spirits brought us together for a purpose beyond our own happiness? I believe the spirits rarely waste their time on small matters. If they have taken such interest in our lives, it is because our choices will echo through generations. Ayana paused, then asked the question that mattered most. Can you accept a marriage built on spiritual purpose rather than romantic love? Rebecca looked at this man who had saved her life, offered her sanctuary among his people, and was now proposing a partnership based on honesty rather than pretty deceptions. She thought of her unborn child, who would need a father's protection and guidance in this complex world. She thought of the community that had welcomed her despite their historical reasons for suspicion. Most importantly, she thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger, more independent, more aware of her own worth than she had ever been in her father's house or in James Whitmore's arms. This marriage would not diminish her, but would give her a platform to build something meaningful. Yes, she said quietly. I can accept such a marriage. I think it might be exactly what I need. Ayana's face broke into the first genuine smile she had seen from him since their arrival at the village. Then we should return to the council and give our answer. As they walked back toward the great fire, where the tribe still waited for their decision, Ayana caught Rebecca's arm. You are making a wise choice, the older woman said softly. Ayana is a good man, and this marriage will give you strength neither of you could achieve alone. Rebecca nodded, feeling a sense of rightness about her decision that had nothing to do with romantic feelings and everything to do with building a future worthy of the child she carried. When they rejoined the tribal gathering, she spoke clearly. Enough for everyone to hear. I accept this sacred union. If Ayana is willing to have me as his wife, I am willing to become his partner in all things. Ayana stepped forward and took her hands in his, the gesture formal but warm. I accept Rebecca as my wife, to build a life together in service to our people and the generations yet to come. The cheer that rose from the assembled tribe was joyous and heartfelt. Chief Nanton declared that the wedding ceremony would take place in 1 week, giving the community time to prepare for a celebration worthy of such a spiritually significant union. As the crowd began to disperse, making excited plans for the wedding preparations, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer the disgraced daughter cast out by her father, nor the naive girl deceived by a charming stranger. She was becoming something entirely new, an Apache wife, a bridge between worlds, and a woman who would face her future with eyes wide open and a partner worthy of her trust. The marriage would not be perfect, and love might never bloom between them as it did in romantic stories, but it would be honest, respectful, and built on a foundation solid enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. For the first time since learning of her pregnancy, Rebecca felt genuinely excited about her future. Whatever challenges awaited her as Ayana's wife and as a white woman making her life among the Apache, she would face them with courage, dignity, and the support of a community that had chosen to make her one of their own. The week leading up to Rebecca's wedding transformed the entire Apache village into a hive of activity unlike anything she had witnessed. What she had expected to be a simple ceremony became an elaborate celebration that would unite not just two people, but symbolically bridge two entirely different worlds. Every member of the community had a role to play in creating a wedding that would be remembered for generations. Ayana took charge of preparing Rebecca for her new role as an Apache wife, but the process involved far more than selecting clothing or learning ceremonial steps. An Apache wedding is not just about the bride and groom, she explained as they sat together in her tipi, surrounded by other women who had come to help with preparations. It is about the joining of families, the blessing of the community, and the creation of new possibilities for our people. The women had decided to create a wedding dress that would reflect Rebecca's unique position, neither fully white nor fully Apache, but something entirely new. They worked with materials that told her story: white deerskin to represent her origins, decorated with traditional Apache beadwork in patterns that symbolized rebirth and transformation. Around the hem, they sewed tiny shells brought from distant oceans, representing the journey that had brought her to them. But the most significant addition was a necklace, crafted by Cochise's shadow himself. The ancient medicine man had spent days selecting each stone and bead, creating a piece that would serve as both adornment and spiritual protection. At its center hung a piece of turquoise carved into the shape of a bridge, representing Rebecca's role as a connector between peoples. "This necklace will be passed down to your daughters and their daughters," Cochise's shadow told Rebecca when he presented it to her. "It will remind them always that they come from two worlds and belong fully to both." While the women prepared Rebecca, the men worked with Ayanna to ready him for his new responsibilities as a husband and community leader. Apache marriages carried political implications, especially when the groom was someone marked by spiritual visions. Ayanna would not just be taking a wife, he would be accepting responsibility for helping to guide the tribe through the challenging times ahead. Chief Nanton took personal charge of Ayanna's preparation, sharing wisdom that had been passed down through generations of Apache leaders. "Marriage among our people is a sacred trust," he told his nephew as they sat together in the sweat lodge, purifying themselves through heat and prayer. "Your wife will bring you strength, but she will also bring challenges that will test everything you believe about yourself and your place in the world. I understand the weight of this responsibility, Uncle. Do you?" Nanton's eyes were serious in the dim light. "This woman carries within her a child that will be both Apache and white, accepted fully by neither world unless you and she work to create a place where such children can thrive. Your marriage is not just about your happiness, it is about creating a new path for our people." Ayanna absorbed these words, feeling the full weight of the spiritual visions that had brought Rebecca to him. "The spirits showed me that our children would be bridge builders. I believe this marriage will help our people survive the changes coming to this land. Perhaps. But survival requires more than spiritual blessing. It requires practical wisdom, compromise, and the courage to adapt when old ways no longer serve." Nanton ladled more water onto the hot stones, filling the lodge with steam. "Your white wife will see things differently than any Apache woman. Sometimes this will frustrate you. Sometimes it will anger you. But if you are wise, you will learn from her perspective instead of fighting it." These conversations continued throughout the week, with various tribal elders sharing their insights about marriage, leadership, and the delicate balance required to maintain harmony within the community. Ayanna found himself being prepared not just for married life, but for a role as a cultural interpreter, someone who could help his people understand the white world while helping whites understand Apache ways. Meanwhile, Rebecca was learning about the complex rituals that would make her marriage binding in Apache eyes. The ceremony would take place over 3 days, with each phase serving a different spiritual and social purpose. The first day would focus on cleansing and preparation, removing any negative influences from her past life. The second day would involve the actual wedding ceremony, conducted according to ancient Apache traditions. The third day would celebrate her full integration into the tribe, marking her transition from outsider to family member. "The most important moment," Ayanna explained as they practiced the ceremonial steps, "comes when you and Ayanna drink from the sacred wedding cup. This cup has been used in Apache weddings for over 200 years, passed down through generations of families. When you drink from it, you become connected to every Apache couple who came before you." The idea of joining such an ancient tradition both thrilled and terrified Rebecca. She was being offered something precious, a place in a continuous story. That stretched back centuries and would continue long after she was gone. But accepting this gift meant taking responsibility for preserving and honoring traditions she was only beginning to understand. 3 days before the wedding, unexpected visitors arrived that changed everything about the planned celebration. A group of Apache riders appeared at the valley's entrance, led by a warrior named Cochise's son, not the famous chief himself, but a younger man who had taken his father's name to honor his memory. They came from a larger Apache band that had been fighting the cavalry further south, and their arrival brought news that made the entire village tense with concern. "The soldiers are moving in greater numbers than we have seen before," Cochise's son reported to the hastily assembled tribal council. "They have new weapons, better supply lines, and orders to force all Apache onto reservations before the end of the year. Our traditional hiding places are being discovered one by one." The news cast a shadow over the wedding preparations, forcing the tribe to confront the reality that their isolated existence might soon come to an end. Some of the warriors argued for joining the fighting bands, taking up arms against the encroaching cavalry. Others suggested retreating even deeper into the mountains, abandoning their fertile valley for more remote hideouts. But it was Rebecca who offered a third perspective, one that surprised everyone, including herself. What if this wedding could be more than just a ceremony? She suggested during a council meeting that included both the village elders and the visiting warriors. What if it could be a demonstration of what's possible when Apache and white people work together instead of fighting each other? The suggestion was met with skeptical silence. Nalnish, who had opposed Rebecca's presence from the beginning, was the first to voice the obvious objection. "How can any white person be trusted? They have broken every promise, violated every treaty, stolen every piece of land they have ever wanted." "Because I'm not asking you to trust all white people," Rebecca replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm asking you to consider whether some white people like me who have been cast out by their own communities might be willing to work for something different." She stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the council circle. "I know white communities, how they think, how they make decisions. I know their strengths and their weaknesses. If I were truly accepted as Apache, if my marriage to Iana were seen as legitimate by both peoples, I could serve as a translator between worlds." Chief Nanton leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "What exactly are you proposing? Instead of hiding this wedding, what if we invited witnesses from both communities? What if we used this ceremony to show that Apache and whites can create something new together, something that benefits both peoples?" The idea was so radical that it took several minutes for anyone to respond. Inviting white witnesses to an Apache ceremony was unprecedented, potentially dangerous, and completely contrary to the band's policy of remaining hidden from outsiders. But Cochise's shadow slowly nodded his ancient head. "The spirits showed me this wedding would be significant beyond our tribe. Perhaps this is what they meant." Iana spoke for the first time since the council convened. "If we invite white witnesses, they would learn the location of our hidden valley. We would be revealing our greatest secret." "Perhaps it's time to stop hiding," Rebecca said quietly. "Perhaps it's time to start building relationships that could protect your people in ways that hiding cannot." The debate that followed was intense and sometimes heated, with valid arguments on all sides. Inviting white witnesses could indeed lead to discovery by hostile forces, but it could also create allies who might help protect the tribe's interests. The wedding could become a powerful symbol of cooperation, or it could be seen as betrayal by Apache and whites alike. In the end, it was Cochise's son who provided the deciding factor. "Our fighting has not stopped the cavalry's advance," he admitted reluctantly. "Every month, more of our people are forced onto reservations or killed in battle. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach." The council voted to proceed with Rebecca's proposal, but with careful precautions. They would invite a small group of white witnesses, people known to be sympathetic to Apache concerns. including a missionary named Father Miguel who had worked to protect Apache families, and a trader named Samuel Morrison who had always dealt fairly with tribal representatives. Most controversially, they decided to extend an invitation to Thomas Martinez, Rebecca's estranged father. The invitation would serve multiple purposes, demonstrating that Rebecca had found honor and happiness despite his rejection, showing that Apache people could be generous even to those who had wronged them, and potentially opening a dialogue between the tribe and white ranchers in the region. When Rebecca learned of this decision, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her desperately wanted her father's approval and acceptance, while another part feared his continued rejection could undermine her new life. But she recognized the political wisdom of the gesture, even if it terrified her personally. What if he refuses to come? She asked Itzayana as they worked on final alterations to her wedding dress. Then he will miss witnessing his daughter's transformation into something remarkable, the older woman replied pragmatically. But if he does come, he will see that you have not just survived, but thrived without his approval. The invitations were sent out with Apache messengers, along with carefully worded explanations of the ceremony's significance and the peaceful intentions behind it. The messengers were instructed to emphasize that this was an opportunity to witness something historic, the creation of a new model for Apache-white relations, based on mutual respect rather than conflict. As the final preparations continued, Rebecca found herself caught between excitement and terror. In 3 days, she would stand before representatives of both worlds and pledge her life to a man she was still learning to know. The ceremony would mark her complete transformation from Thomas Martinez's disgraced daughter to Ayana's Apache wife, but it would also thrust her into a role as a cultural ambassador that she wasn't sure she was ready to fulfill. The night before the wedding began, Ayana found a moment to speak with Rebecca privately, one last conversation before they became husband and wife. They met at the sacred spring where they had first shared water, the place where her journey toward this new life had truly begun. "Are you certain about tomorrow?" he asked, his voice gentle in the darkness. "Once we are married in front of both our peoples, there will be no going back. You will be Apache in the eyes of the world, with all the dangers and responsibilities that entails." Rebecca looked up at the stars scattered across the clear desert sky, thinking of all the paths that had led her to this moment. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This marriage, this new life, it feels like the first real choice I've ever made. And if your father comes, if he tries to convince you to return to your old life, then he'll learn that his daughter has grown into a woman who makes her own decisions." Rebecca's voice was steady, filled with a confidence that surprised even her. "I am no longer the girl he cast out. I am becoming someone new, someone stronger." Ayana nodded, seeing the transformation that had taken place in the woman he had found dying in the desert. "Tomorrow you will become my wife in the eyes of our people and yours. But tonight, I want you to know that you have already become something more important. You have become yourself." As they walked back toward the village where the wedding fires were already being prepared, Rebecca felt a deep sense of rightness about the path she had chosen. Tomorrow would bring challenges, complications, and possibly conflicts she couldn't yet imagine. But it would also bring the formal beginning of a new life built on honesty, respect, and the courage to create something entirely new. The wedding of Rebecca Martinez and Ayana would be more than just a ceremony. It would be the birth of a new possibility, a demonstration that even the deepest divisions could be bridged by people willing to see beyond the prejudices of their past. In the morning, she would put on her dress of white deerskin and Apache beadwork, wear the necklace that would connect her to generations of Apache women, and step forward into a future that belonged neither to the white world nor the Apache world, but to something entirely new. She was ready. Apache Warrior Story, Part 6, Part 6. The sacred union dawn of the first wedding day broke clear and brilliant over the hidden valley. painting the red cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. Rebecca woke to the sound of singing Apache women's voices raised in ancient songs of blessing and preparation that had welcomed countless brides for generations beyond memory. The melodies were hauntingly beautiful, weaving together themes of fertility, protection, and transformation that made her skin prickle with anticipation. But beneath the excitement ran an undercurrent of tension. The white witnesses were expected to arrive sometime during the morning, and no one knew what their presence would bring to this sacred space. Some tribal members had spent the night in prayer, asking the spirits to protect their hidden valley from any negative consequences of revealing its location to outsiders. Rebecca's preparation began before sunrise with a purification ceremony conducted by the tribal women. They led her to a natural pool formed by hot springs that bubbled up from deep within the earth, a place considered sacred to Apache women for its healing properties. The water was perfectly warm, mineral-rich, and said to wash away the sorrows and mistakes of the past. "Today you die to your old life," Itzayana intoned as Rebecca lowered herself into the steaming water. "You were born white, lived as white, suffered as white. But when you emerge from these sacred waters, you will be reborn as Apache with all the rights and responsibilities that come with joining our people." The ritual bath lasted nearly an hour, with different women taking turns to wash Rebecca's hair with yucca root soap, anoint her skin with oils made from desert plants, and speak blessings over her transformation. Each blessing was offered in Apache, but Itzayana translated the most important ones for Rebecca's understanding. "May your womb be fruitful and your children strong. May your husband honor you and your voice carry wisdom and counsel. May you bridge the gap between peoples and bring peace where there has been conflict. May the spirits of your new ancestors welcome you as their daughter." As the ceremony concluded, Rebecca felt genuinely transformed. The weight of her past mistakes, the shame of her father's rejection, the fear of an uncertain future, all of it seemed to wash away with the sacred water. When she emerged from the pool, wrapped in soft blankets woven by Apache hands, she felt lighter than she had in months. But the lightness was temporary. As the women began the elaborate process of dressing her for the ceremony, a commotion outside announced the arrival of the first white witnesses. Through the tippy walls, Rebecca could hear voices speaking English formal. Nervous voices that carried the uncertainty of people entering completely foreign territory. Father Miguel arrived first, an elderly Catholic priest whose weathered face spoke of decades spent ministering to frontier communities. He had worked with Apache families before, helping to negotiate the release of captives and providing sanctuary for those fleeing cavalry raids. His presence at the wedding carried the implicit message that not all white religious leaders viewed Apache people as heathens to be converted or eliminated. Samuel Morrison came next, a trader whose fair dealings had earned him respect throughout the territory. Unlike many merchants who cheated native customers or sold them watered-down whiskey, Morrison had built his reputation on honest transactions and reliable goods. His attendance suggested that profitable relationships between Apache and white communities were possible, but it was the third arrival that sent shockwaves through the village. Thomas Martinez, Rebecca's father, accompanied by two of his ranch hands. The man who had cast out his pregnant daughter, who had called her dead to him, had actually come to witness her Apache wedding. Rebecca heard the murmur of surprised voices from outside, followed by a tense silence as the Apache community processed this development. Itzayana quietly left the tipi to gather information, returning several minutes later with a complex expression on her weathered face. "Your father has come," she said simply. "He sits with the other white witnesses, but he speaks to no one. Chief Nanton welcomed him according to our customs of hospitality, but the welcome was formal, nothing more." Rebecca's hands trembled as the women continued adorning her with the elaborate jewelry and ceremonial accessories that marked her as an Apache bride. "How does he look? What did he say?" He looks like a man who has aged 10 years in the past. Few months. As for what he said, Itzayana paused, choosing her words carefully. He asked if you were well, if the child you carry is healthy, nothing more. The knowledge that her father was actually present, sitting somewhere in the village, that had become her sanctuary, set Rebecca's emotions into chaos. Part of her wanted to run to him, to seek his forgiveness and approval even now. But a stronger part remembered his cruel words, his cold rejection, his willingness to cast her out into the desert to die. I won't let his presence disrupt this ceremony, Rebecca said firmly, as much to convince herself as to reassure the women helping her. This is my day, my choice, my new life. He can witness it or not, approve or not, but he cannot control it. The women smiled at her declaration, recognizing the strength that had emerged from their months of working together. This was not the broken girl who had arrived in their valley. This was a woman who had learned to value herself independently of male approval. As the morning progressed, more Apache families arrived from neighboring bands to witness the historic ceremony. Word had spread through the hidden network of tribal communications, drawing representatives from groups that rarely gathered in one place. The presence of so many Apache witnesses elevated the wedding from a local event to something approaching an intertribal council. Among the new arrivals was an ancient Apache woman named Grandmother Moon, whose advanced age and reputation for wisdom made her voice carry enormous weight in tribal matters. She had known Cochise personally, had witnessed the great changes that had swept through Apache lands, and her blessing could legitimize Rebecca's marriage in ways that even Chief Nanton's approval could not. Bring the white woman to me, Grandmother Moon commanded when she arrived, her voice still strong despite her 90-some years. I would see for myself this bride who brings two worlds together. Rebecca was led from the preparation tipi to meet this legendary figure, still wearing only the simple white dress that would serve as the foundation for her wedding outfit. Grandmother Moon studied her with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, taking in not just her appearance but something deeper. You carry Apache blood now, the old woman said finally, speaking in English that was heavily accented, but perfectly clear. Not in your veins, but in your spirit. The spirits have claimed you as their own. How can you tell? Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about this woman's insights. Because you stand straight when meeting me, neither cowering like a captive nor posturing like a conqueror. You show respect but not submission, interest but not desperation. These are Apache virtues. Grandmother Moon reached out and placed her gnarled hand on Rebecca's rounded belly. This child will be a gift to both peoples, but only if it is raised to honor both heritages equally. The blessing from such a revered elder sent ripples of excitement through the assembled Apache witnesses. If Grandmother Moon approved of the union, it carried spiritual authority that transcended any political considerations. But the most dramatic moment came when the formal ceremony began at midday. The entire community, Apache and white witnesses, alike gathered in a great circle around the sacred fire that burned at the heart of the village. The white visitors sat together on one side, clearly uncomfortable but maintaining respectful silence, while the Apache families filled the rest of the circle. Cochise's shadow began the ceremony with prayers in the ancient Apache language, calling upon the spirits of the ancestors to bless this unprecedented union. The chants were haunting and beautiful, rising and falling in patterns that seemed to echo the rhythms of the desert wind and the heartbeat of the earth itself. Then came that moment Rebecca had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, her formal presentation as an Apache bride. Led by Itzayana and followed by the other tribal women, she walked slowly into the center of the circle, her wedding dress catching the sunlight and drawing gasps of admiration from the assembled witnesses. The dress was a masterpiece of cultural fusion, traditional white deerskin decorated with intricate Apache beadwork, but incorporating design elements that told Rebecca's unique story. The patterns included symbols for journey, transformation, and bridge building, while the turquoise necklace created by Cochise's shadow caught the light like a captured sky. But it was Rebecca herself who commanded attention, the frightened, desperate woman who had arrived in the valley months earlier had been replaced by someone radiant with confidence and purpose. She moved with Apache grace, carried herself with Apache dignity, and faced the assembly with Apache courage. When she reached the center of the circle, Ayanna stepped forward to meet her. He wore traditional warrior regalia buckskin, decorated with silver concos, eagle feathers in his hair, and ceremonial paint that marked him as a man blessed by powerful visions. Together, they made a striking couple that seemed to embody the possibility of harmony between their two peoples. Chief Nanton rose to speak, addressing both the Apache and white witnesses in carefully chosen words that carried multiple layers of meaning. Today we witness something that has never happened before in the long history of our people. He began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent circle. An Apache warrior takes as his wife a woman born to another people, but claimed by our spirits as one of our own. This is not conquest or submission, but transformation, the creation of something new that honors both traditions. He turned to address the white witnesses directly. You who have come from the world beyond our valley, understand that what you see today is not the taming of a white woman by savage Indians, nor the corruption of Apache purity by foreign blood. You see the birth of a new possibility, the joining of peoples who have too long seen each other as enemies. Thomas Martinez sat motionless during this speech, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. But Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his hat, the careful control he was maintaining over his emotions. The actual marriage ceremony followed ancient Apache traditions, but with explanations provided for the white witnesses. Ayanna and Rebecca drank from the sacred wedding cup that had been used for generations, symbolically sharing their lives and futures. They exchanged gifts that represented their commitment to providing for each other, Ayanna offering a beautifully crafted bow that demonstrated his ability to hunt and protect, Rebecca presenting a woven basket that showed her mastery of Apache domestic arts. But the most powerful moment came when Cochise's shadow called upon the spirits to bless their union. The ancient medicine man raised his arms toward the sky and spoke words that seemed to vibrate with supernatural authority. Great Spirit, you who watch over all peoples, you who see no difference between Apache and white in the matters of the heart, bless this union. Make these two people one flesh, one spirit, one purpose. Let their children carry the best of both worlds, and let their love be a bridge across the divisions that separate peoples. As his words faded into the desert, silence, a golden eagle circled overhead, a sign that even the skeptical white witnesses could not dismiss as coincidence. In Apache tradition, the eagle was a messenger between the earthly and spirit worlds, and its appearance during the wedding ceremony was interpreted as powerful spiritual approval. The ceremony concluded with the ritual that would formally mark Rebecca's complete transformation from white woman to Apache wife. Chief Nanton removed a small pouch of red earth from around his neck soil, taken from the most sacred Apache burial grounds, and mixed it with water from the crying woman, spring where Rebecca and Ayanna had first shared sustenance. With earth from our ancestors and water from our sacred places, I mark you as Apache, he said, painting a small symbol on Rebecca's forehead. You are no longer white, no longer outsider, no longer alone. You are Ayanna's wife, our daughter, and a member of this tribe with all the rights and protections that membership brings. The assembled Apache witnesses erupted in celebration, singing, drumming, and dancing that would continue well into the night. But Rebecca's attention was focused on the white witnesses, particularly her father, trying to gauge their reactions to what they had witnessed. Father Miguel appeared moved by the cave ceremony's spiritual depth, perhaps recognizing elements that echoed his own religious traditions. Samuel Morrison looked thoughtful, clearly calculating the political and economic implications of what he had seen. But Thomas Martinez remained an enigma, his face carefully neutral as he watched his daughter being formally adopted into a people. He had been raised to consider enemies. As the celebration continued around them, Ayanna took Rebecca's hand and led her away from the crowd to a quiet spot, where they could finally speak privately as husband and wife. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice gentle with concern. "I know this day has been overwhelming, especially with your father's presence." Rebecca considered the question carefully, trying to sort through the complex emotions swirling in her chest. "I feel complete," she said finally. "Like I've been searching for my place in the world without knowing it, and I've finally found where I belong." "And your father? Are you disappointed that he showed no emotion during the ceremony?" "No," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I realized today that I don't need his approval anymore. I would welcome his acceptance, but I don't require it. I am no longer defined by his opinion of me." Ayanna smiled, recognizing the profound growth this represented. "Then you have truly become Apache. We believe that a person's worth comes from their actions and character, not from the approval of others." As the sun began to set over the hidden valley, painting the celebration in shades of gold and orange, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything she thought mattered: her family's love, her place in white society, her naive faith in romantic promises. But in losing those things, she had gained something far more valuable: strength, independence, and a love built on respect rather than pretty lies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she and Ayanna began their married life together. The white witnesses would return to their communities with stories of what they had seen, potentially changing how Apache white relations were perceived throughout the territory. And she would have to navigate the complex dynamics of being a white woman permanently integrated into Apache society. But tonight, surrounded by the joyful celebration of her new people, wearing the necklace that connected her to generations of Apache women, and standing beside the husband who had offered her partnership rather than ownership, Rebecca felt truly blessed by the spirits that had guided her path. She was no longer Rebecca Martinez, the disgraced rancher's daughter. She was woman who walks between worlds, Apache wife, bridge builder, and mother-to-be of children who would belong fully to both peoples. Her transformation was complete, but her story was just beginning. 5 years later, Rebecca stood on the same cliff where Ayanna had first spotted her struggling through the desert. But now she was watching a very different scene unfold in the valley below. A mixed group of Apache and white children played together beside the stream, their laughter echoing off the red canyon walls as they splashed in the clear water, without regard for the color of each other's skin. Among them was her own son, Daniel. Ayanna Martinez named to honor both his heritage as a sturdy 4-year-old with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He spoke Apache as fluently as English, moved through the desert with native skill, yet could also read and write better than most white children his age. He was exactly what Cochise's Shadow's visions had promised, a bridge between worlds. Hidden Valley had changed dramatically since Rebecca's wedding day. What had once been a secret Apache refuge was now something unprecedented in American Southwest, a truly integrated community where Apache and white families lived side by side, sharing resources, knowledge, and responsibilities. The transformation hadn't happened overnight or without challenges. The white witnesses to Rebecca's wedding had returned to their communities with stories that sparked intense debate throughout the territory. Some saw the Apache-white marriage as proof that peaceful coexistence was possible. Others viewed it as a dangerous precedent that undermined the clear racial boundaries they believed necessary for survival. Father Miguel had proven the most influential advocate, using his position in the Catholic Church to argue that Rebecca's integration into Apache society demonstrated the universal human capacity for redemption and transformation. His sermons about the wedding began attracting white families, who had grown weary of the constant cycle of violence that defined frontier life. Samuel Morrison had taken a more practical approach, establishing trading relationships that benefited both communities. The Apache had knowledge of plants, minerals, and water sources that could make white settlers more successful, while white communities had access to manufactured goods and agricultural techniques that could improve Apache living conditions. But it was Thomas Martinez's eventual change of heart that had truly opened the floodgates of transformation. 3 months after the wedding, Rebecca's father had returned to the valley, not as a witness this time, but as a man seeking reconciliation with the daughter he had wronged. The meeting had been painful for both of them, filled with tears, accusations, and slowly dawning understanding. "I thought I was protecting our family's honor," Thomas had told Rebecca as they sat beside the same sacred spring where she had first found refuge. "I thought casting you out would somehow undo the shame, make people forget what had happened. Instead, I destroyed the most precious thing in my life." Rebecca had listened to his apology with the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. "You taught me that a person's worth isn't determined by others' approval," she had replied. "It was a hard lesson, but perhaps the most valuable one I ever learned." Their reconciliation had been gradual, built on shared work rather than shared words. Thomas began visiting the valley regularly, initially to see his grandson, but gradually becoming involved in the community's development. His cattle ranching expertise proved invaluable as the Apache established their own herds, while his connections in white communities helped establish the legitimacy of the integrated settlement. The real breakthrough came when cavalry units, following orders to force all Apache onto government reservations, discovered the valley and prepared to attack. It was Thomas Martinez who rode out to meet them, using his reputation and connections to convince the commanding officer that this particular Apache band posed no threat to white settlements. "These aren't hostiles," he had argued with Colonel Harrison, a man he had known for years. "Their families trying to build something new, something that could end the violence that's been tearing this territory apart. Give them a chance to prove what's possible." The reprieve Thomas had won allowed the community to formalize its existence, obtaining government recognition as an official settlement where Apache and white citizens enjoyed equal rights and protections. It was an unprecedented arrangement that attracted attention from as far away as Washington, D.C. Now, 5 years after that desperate night when Rebecca had been cast into the desert with nothing but her unborn child, she served as the community's elected leader, a position that would have been unthinkable for any woman, Apache or white, in the traditional societies of either culture. The role suited her perfectly. Her unique background allowed her to understand both communities' perspectives, while her experience of loss and redemption gave her the wisdom to help others navigate their own transformations. Under her leadership, the settlement had become a model for peaceful coexistence that was being studied by government officials and social reformers across the nation. But perhaps more importantly, Rebecca had found the personal happiness that had seemed impossible during those dark months of her exile. Her marriage to Iana had evolved from spiritual partnership into genuine love, built on shared struggles and mutual respect. They had 2 more children, now twin daughters named Elena and Maria, who embodied the best of both cultures. Iana had grown into his role as spiritual leader and cultural interpreter, using his visions to guide the community through challenges, while helping newcomers understand the deep spiritual connections that made integration possible. His prophecies about bridge building had proven remarkably accurate, as their children and others like them moved easily between Apache and white communities throughout the Southwest. On this particular evening, as Rebecca watched the mixed group of children playing in the stream, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of profound contentment. The woman who had once defined herself by her father's approval, by romantic love, by society's expectations, had learned to draw strength from her own character and choices, A familiar voice interrupted her reverie. The spirits chose well when. They sent me to find you, Ayanna said, joining her on the cliff overlook. Rebecca smiled, leaning into her husband's embrace. I used to think the spirits were cruel, taking away everything I thought I wanted. Now I understand they were actually giving me everything I needed. And what did you need? The chance to discover who I really was, beneath all the roles others had assigned me. The opportunity to build something meaningful instead of just inheriting someone else's dreams. Rebecca gestured toward the thriving community below. A love based on truth rather than pretty lies. As the sun set over the valley that had become their world, painting the desert landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Rebecca felt the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. She had been kicked out pregnant by her own father, left to die in the desert with nothing but her unborn child and her stubborn refusal to surrender. But that seeming catastrophe had led her to a destiny more meaningful than anything she could have imagined in her father's house or in James Whitmore's lying arms. She had become exactly what Cochise's Shadow's visions had promised, a bridge between worlds, a woman who helped others find hope in the midst of despair, a mother raising children who would inherit the best of both their heritages. The Apache warrior had indeed claimed her as his sacred wife, but more than that, she had claimed herself as a woman worthy of respect, love, and happiness. The scared girl who had ridden into the desert 5 years earlier was gone, replaced by a leader whose influence would echo through generations. As they walked back toward their home, where their children waited with excited stories of their days. Adventures. Rebecca Martinez, now and forever, woman who walks between worlds, knew that her transformation was complete. She had found her place in the world, and that place was exactly where she was meant to be. The spirits, it seemed, had planned everything perfectly from the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.